That woman's been eyeing this gate for 10 minutes, keeps checking her phone and looking around.
Officer Reddington was already walking toward Captain Millam, with two other officers falling in step behind him.
You. Hands behind your back.
Officer, is there a problem? Can you tell me what this is about?
You've been acting suspicious. Watching this gate. Checking your phone over and over.
Officer, I'm just here waiting for a friend's connecting flight.
You're not fooling anyone here. I've heard every excuse in the book. Yours isn't special. Now, don't make this any harder than it has to be. Hands behind your back.
What Officer Reddington didn't know was that the woman he was handcuffing was a decorated military pilot whose name was known by every pilot in that terminal. Captain Dixie Millam sat at gate C-14, her leg bouncing under the seat in front of her. She checked her phone again. Still no update. Her friend Thomas was supposed to catch a connecting military flight 2 gates down, and it was running late. She had promised to make sure he didn't miss it. So she kept checking, kept glancing at the boards, kept scanning the crowd for his face. She didn't think twice about any of it. Why would she? She was just a woman waiting at an airport, wearing jeans and a plain white shirt, watching the clock like everyone else in that terminal. But someone else was watching her, too. Officer Marcus Reddington stood near the coffee stand, arms crossed, eyes locked on her. He watched her check her phone, watched her look around, watched her stand up, then sit back down. "That woman's been eyeing this gate for 10 minutes, he said into his radio. Keeps checking her phone, keeps looking around like she's casing it. He didn't wait for a response. He was already walking toward her, 2 other officers falling in step behind him. Dixie looked up when the shadow crossed her lap. 3 uniforms, all staring at her. "Ma'am, I need you to stand up," Reddington said. His voice was flat and hard, like he'd already decided something about her. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked. She stayed calm. She'd been trained to stay calm in rooms far worse than this one. "I said stand up." She stood, slowly, hands visible. "Can you tell me what this is about?" she asked again. "You've been acting suspicious, watching this gate, checking your phone over and over." He said it like it was obvious, like it was a crime. "I'm waiting for a friend's connecting flight," Dixie said. "That's all this is." Reddington's jaw tightened. "Sure it is." A few travelers nearby had started to notice. Heads turned. A woman pulled her son a little closer. "I need to see some ID," Reddington said. Dixie reached slowly for her bag. "It's right here. I'm going to get my wallet." "Hands where I can see them," he barked, stepping in close, like she'd made a sudden move instead of a slow, careful one. "They are where you can see them," Dixie said, her voice sharpening now. "I told you what I was doing before I did it. Don't get smart with me." "I'm not being smart. I'm being clear." Her eyes didn't waver. "You asked a question. I answered it." That seemed to make him angrier, not calmer. Like her calm was an insult. "You think you can just talk to me however you want?" Reddington snapped. "You've got an attitude problem." Dixie felt her pulse pick up, but she kept her voice level. "I don't have an attitude. I have a flight to catch." "Ma'am, you are not cooperating. I am standing right here, answering every question you ask me. That's not what I asked you to do." His voice rose now, loud enough that half the gate was watching. "I told you to stay still, and you keep moving your hands." "I haven't moved my hands since you told me not to." Reddington's face went red. He looked at the other 2 officers like he needed backup for a decision he was about to make. Nobody stopped him. "Turn around," he said. "Get on the ground." "On the ground? For checking my phone?" Dixie's voice cracked with disbelief, not fear. "You haven't told me what crime I've committed. Get on the ground." For one long second, she stared at him. She thought about arguing further. She thought about her rights, about everything she knew was true and fair. But she also knew what happened to people, especially people who looked like her when they argued with an officer who had already made up his mind. So she got down, knees first, then hands, onto the hard tile floor of a public airport gate in front of dozens of strangers holding up their phones. "This is insane," a man muttered nearby, phone raised. Reddington ignored him. He knelt down, grabbed Dixie's wrist, and pulled it behind her back. "You're not even going to tell me why?" Dixie asked, her cheek nearly against the cold floor. "You'll find out at the station." The cuffs clicked shut around her wrists, cold metal biting into her skin. Somewhere behind her, a phone camera light blinked red, recording every second. Dixie lay on the terminal floor with her cheek almost touching the tile. The cuffs dug into her wrists. Around her, a crowd had formed a loose circle, phones raised, no one stepping in. "Get her bag," Reddington said to one of the other officers. A young officer grabbed her carry-on and dumped it out right there on the floor. Her wallet hit the tile and flipped open. Her passport slid out next to it, along with a folded boarding pass and a laminated card with her photo on it. Reddington crouched down and looked at what had spilled out. He picked up the laminated card, turned it over once, then dropped it like it was nothing. It was her military ID, U.S. Air Force, Captain Dixie Milham. Right next to it lay another card, thicker, with a small gold emblem stamped into the corner. Her pilot's license. "That real?" the young officer asked, glancing down. "Anybody can print a laminated card," Reddington said, not even looking at it twice. He kicked it aside with the toe of his boot, sliding it a few inches across the floor like it was trash. "People fake this stuff all the time." "I'm a captain in the United States Air Force," Dixie said from the floor, her voice steady even though her arms ached from the cuffs. "That ID is real. You can call it in right now. We'll sort it out downtown. You don't have to sort anything out. Look at it. Actually look at it." Reddington didn't look at it again. He stood up, brushing his hands off like he'd touched something dirty. Near the checkpoint, a TSA supervisor named Malik Coulson had stopped mid-stride, watching the whole thing unfold. He'd seen plenty of arrests in this terminal before. Most were quiet, quick, over in a minute. This one felt different. Something about the way the officer kicked that ID aside without even glancing at it twice stuck in Malik's gut, like a splinter. He pulled out his phone and started recording. "Sir? I got backup requested for a possible resisting," Reddington said into his radio, walking a few steps away from Dixie. "Female, uncooperative, refused to comply with commands." That wasn't true, and Dixie knew it. She'd done everything he'd asked, the second he'd asked it. But lying into a radio was easier than admitting he might be wrong. Back at the precinct desk, Sergeant Axel Wellmore heard the call come through and approved the arrest without asking a single question. He didn't ask what she'd actually done. He didn't ask if there was any real evidence. He just said, "Copy that, proceed," and moved on to the next call on his desk, like Dixie Milham was a checkbox instead of a person zip-tied to the floor of a public airport. "This is wrong," a woman near the front of the crowd said quietly, but nobody in a uniform seemed to hear her or care if they did. Reddington walked back over and hauled Dixie up by her arm, rougher than he needed to. Her shoulder wrenched, and she winced but didn't cry out. She wasn't going to give him that. "Let's go," he said. "You didn't even run my name," Dixie said as he pushed her forward. "You had my real ID in your hand, and you didn't run it. Keep walking. I want you to call it in. Right now. Before you walk me one more step. You don't get to tell me what to do." Malik kept his phone up, following a few steps behind at a careful distance, filming everything. The cuffs, the scattered bag, the ID still lying forgotten on the floor where Reddington had kicked it. Other officers began clearing bystanders back, but nobody told Malik to stop. Nobody noticed him at all. Dixie's mind raced, even as her body stayed calm. She thought about every training exercise, every high-pressure cockpit decision she'd made under fire. None of it had prepared her for this, being marched through a public terminal in handcuffs for the crime of checking her phone. She kept her chin up. She wasn't going to look small. Not for him. Not for anyone watching. "Move!" Reddington snapped again, gripping her arm and steering her past the security checkpoint toward the long row of connecting gates ahead. Dixie took one last glance back at the floor behind her, at her ID still sitting there, ignored, 10 feet from where a police officer had decided her word meant nothing. Then she looked forward, toward the gates ahead, toward a crowd of travelers she didn't know yet, and toward the moment that was about to turn everything upside down. Reddington gripped Dixie's arm and marched her past the security checkpoint, toward the long row of gates where a commercial flight was boarding. Malik trailed a few steps back, phone still up, still recording. Dixie kept her eyes forward. She could feel every stare from every stranger she passed. Some looked away fast, like they didn't want to be caught watching. Others just stared, phones half raised, unsure if they should film or mind their own business. Up ahead, a line of airline crew members stood near the jet bridge, waiting to board a flight to Atlanta. One of them, a tall man in a captain's uniform, was mid-sentence with a flight attendant when something caught his eye. He stopped talking. He stared at the woman in cuffs being walked past his gate. Captain Lucas Varon blinked once, like he thought he was seeing things. Then, his whole body went still. "Rebar," he said, almost under his breath. Dixie's head turned at the sound of the old call sign. Nobody used that name anymore. Nobody outside the cockpit, anyway. "Captain Millam," Varon said louder, stepping out of the boarding line. "Is that you?" Dixie's throat tightened. She hadn't seen Lucas Varon in years, not since he flew wing under her air cover during a rescue mission that neither of them liked to talk about much, because talking about it meant remembering how close it had come to going wrong. "Lucas," she said, her voice cracking just slightly. Reddington tugged her arm. "Keep moving." But Varon wasn't moving. He set down the small bag in his hand, straightened his shoulders, and snapped to full attention right there in the middle of the terminal. Then he raised his hand in a slow, sharp salute. The gate went quiet. "Sir, step back," Reddington said, clearly rattled, though he tried to sound in control. Varon didn't step back. He held the salute, eyes locked on Dixie, like nothing else in that terminal mattered. Then a second pilot near the same gate noticed what was happening and stood up from his seat. He didn't know Dixie personally, but he recognized the look on Varon's face, and when he saw the small silver wings pin still clipped to the strap of Dixie's overturned bag, dragged along by an officer holding her other arm, he understood enough. He stood and saluted too. Then a third. An older man near the window, off duty by the look of his half-buttoned uniform jacket, rose slowly to his feet with a grunt and lifted his hand as well. It spread through the gate like fire catching dry grass. A retired veteran sitting near the charging station stood, hand to his chest at first, then switched to a salute when he understood what he was looking at. A young woman in a flight attendant's uniform, eyes wide, put her hand over her heart. One by one, uniforms and civilians alike rose from their seats, until nearly 24 people stood in silence, honoring a woman who was still wearing handcuffs. Malik's phone caught every second of it. His hands were shaking slightly, but he kept the frame steady, sweeping slowly across the row of saluting strangers and back to Dixie's face. Dixie stood frozen for a moment, cuffed hands behind her back, chin lifting despite herself. Her eyes stung, but she blinked hard and refused to let a single tear fall in front of Reddington. "She's a decorated combat pilot," Varon said, loud enough for the whole gate to hear, loud enough for the cameras now rising all around them. Silver Star, multiple tours. You've got her in cuffs for what, exactly? Reddington's face went pale, then red. This isn't your business. It is now, Varen said. Everyone here just watched you kick her ID across the floor. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back said, "Is that real? Is she really military?" Someone else answered, "Look at her jacket pin. Look at the wings." Reddington's grip on Dixie's arm tightened, his knuckles whitening. He looked around at the sea of phones, at the pilot still standing, at the passengers no longer looking away. He had a choice in that moment. He could stop. He could apologize. He could take the cuffs off right there and let this end. Instead, his jaw clenched. "The paperwork's already filed," he said, mostly to himself, like he was trying to convince himself it was true. "We're finishing processing." He pulled Dixie forward again, past the row of saluting strangers, toward the holding room down the corridor. Behind them, Varen lowered his hand slowly, watching them go, his face hard with fury. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Malik kept filming until they disappeared around the corner. The holding room was small and gray, with a metal table bolted to the floor and one narrow window facing the tarmac. Reddington pushed Dixie into a chair and unlocked one cuff, then looped it through a bar on the table and locked it again. Her other wrist stayed bound behind her. "Someone will be with you shortly," he said, not meeting her eyes. "You mean someone will finally look at my ID?" Dixie said. He didn't answer. He left, the door clicking shut behind him. Dixie sat alone for a few minutes, her shoulder throbbing where he'd yanked her arm earlier. She flexed her free hand slowly, trying to keep the blood moving, trying to keep her mind sharp. She thought about the salute, about Lucas Varen's face, about all those strangers standing up for her when the people paid to protect her wouldn't even glance at her ID twice. The door opened again. This time it was Sergeant Axel Wellmore, a heavy-set man with tired eyes and a phone already in his hand. He glanced at Dixie, then at the phone screen, then back at Dixie. His face changed the moment he connected the two. "You're the one from the video," he said. "Which video would that be?" Dixie asked. "The one where your officer kicks a valid military ID across the floor? Or the one where 20 people salute me while I'm in cuffs?" Wellmore's jaw tightened. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped just outside the door and lowered his voice, but not low enough. Dixie could still hear every word. "We need to handle this quietly," Wellmore said into his radio, "before the chief sees it blow up any further. Get Reddington's report finished. Standard processing, no comment to press. Nobody talks to anybody until I say so." Outside the door, unseen by either of them, Malik Coulson stood near the security office, pretending to check a clipboard. His phone was in his jacket pocket, screen dark but still recording audio, the microphone pressed close enough to catch every word through the thin door. Wellmore stepped back inside. He looked at Dixie like she was a problem to be managed, not a person who'd just been humiliated in front of a terminal full of witnesses. "Ma'am, we're going to finish processing you," he said. "Standard procedure." "Standard procedure for what crime?" Dixie asked. "Nobody has told me what I'm being charged with." "That'll be determined." "You mean you're going to figure out something to charge me with after the fact?" Dixie leaned forward as far as the cuff would let her. "You had my ID in your hand. Your officer had it in his hand. He kicked it away like garbage instead of running it." Wellmore didn't answer that either. He just gathered a clipboard from the table and started filling out a form, avoiding her eyes entirely. Dixie watched him write. She memorized everything she could. His name tag, the badge number stitched above his pocket, the exact words he'd said into that radio. If nobody else was going to hold this moment accountable, she would. "You know this is being recorded," she said quietly. "Half that terminal has it on video already." Wellmore's pen paused for just a second before he kept writing. "That's not my concern right now." "It should be." He finished the form, tore off a copy, and set it on the table without looking at her. Then he left without another word, the door shutting hard behind him. Dixie sat alone again, cuffed to the table, staring at the gray wall in front of her. Somewhere outside this room, she knew, her name and her face were spreading across the internet faster than any official statement could ever catch up to. She thought about her squadron, about the men and women she'd flown with, the ones who trusted her with their lives at 10,000 feet. None of them would believe this. None of them would understand how a decorated officer could end up cuffed to a table in an airport holding room because a man refused to look twice at a laminated card. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breathing the way she'd been trained to do under fire. When she opened them again, her jaw was set, and something cold and sharp had settled behind her eyes. They wanted this handled quietly. She had no intention of letting that happen. 2 hours passed before the door opened again. A different officer this time, younger, avoiding eye contact, unlocked the cuff from the table and then from Dixie's wrist. Her shoulder ached as blood rushed back into her hand. "You're free to go," he said. "No charges filed." "No charges," Dixie repeated. "So you're admitting there was never a reason to arrest me in the first place?" He didn't answer that. Instead, he slid a printed form across the table. "Field interview record," he said. "For our files." Dixie picked it up and scanned it. Her name, the time, a vague line about suspicious behavior and non-compliance. Nothing about the ID that had been kicked across the floor. Nothing about Wellmore's radio call. "I want this expunged," she said. "This never should have happened. There's no reason this stays on record." "That's not something I can do," the officer said. "It stays on file regardless of outcome." "Regardless of the fact that I did nothing wrong?" He shrugged, like it was out of his hands, like the whole system was built to shrug along with him. "Policy." Dixie stood, rubbing her wrist, and walked out of the small room without another word. There was nothing left to say to a man who wasn't going to change anything. Outside, in the main terminal, Lucas Varon was waiting near the security exit, still in his captain's uniform, arms crossed, jaw tight with barely contained anger. Malik Coulson stood beside him, phone finally lowered, though his hands still looked a little unsteady. "Dixie." Varon stepped forward the second he saw her, his voice softening. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she said, though her voice was tighter than she meant it to be. "Physically, anyway." "That video's already past 1 million views," Malik said quietly. "I didn't mean for it to blow up like that. Somebody needed to see what actually happened." "You did the right thing," Dixie told him. "Don't apologize for that." Varon shook his head. "Reporters are already calling the airline. They want a statement. They want to talk to you." Dixie closed her eyes for a second, exhaustion finally catching up to her. She'd flown 12-hour combat missions with less fatigue than this. "I need to get to a hotel," she said. "I need to think." That evening, in a quiet hotel room with the television on low, Dixie sat on the edge of the bed, still in the same clothes from the airport, watching a press conference she hadn't asked for. Chief Perry Dashworth stood behind a podium, camera flashes popping in front of her, her voice smooth and rehearsed. "Our officers acted within the bounds of their training," Dashworth said. "Any use of officer discretion during a field stop is reviewed carefully. And at this time, we believe the stop was procedurally sound." Dixie's stomach turned. "Procedurally sound," she repeated out loud to the empty room. Dashworth continued, her tone practiced and cold. "We understand the video has generated public concern. and we take that seriously. However, we will not be commenting further on personnel matters at this time. No apology. No mention of the ID kicked across the floor. No mention of Wellmore's radio call, which of course the department didn't know had been caught on tape yet. Just a wall of careful words meant to protect the department, not to answer for what had happened to her. Dixie's phone buzzed again. Another reporter. Then another. She silenced it and set it face down on the nightstand. She thought about Reddington's voice, sharp and dismissive. About Wellmore's whispered order to handle things quietly. About the ID he never bothered to check, twice. And she thought about that gate full of strangers standing up, hands raised, honoring something Reddington couldn't see even when it was staring him in the face. The video would fade, eventually. Videos always did. Public outrage had a short memory, and she knew that better than most people, watching how quickly news cycles could bury even the worst stories. But paperwork didn't fade. A false field interview record sitting quietly in a database somewhere didn't just disappear because people got angry for a week and then moved on. Dixie turned off the television and sat in the dark, replaying every detail of the day. Somewhere out there, a chief was already lying to the public. A sergeant had already tried to keep things quiet. And an officer had already decided her word, her identity, her entire life meant nothing next to his own certainty. She wasn't going to let it end there. Dixie woke early the next morning to her phone buzzing against the nightstand. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Reddington's boot sliding her ID across the tile. She checked the screen. Colonel Larry Palmerson, her old wing commander. She hadn't spoken to him in almost 2 years, not since he'd taken a liaison post at the Pentagon. She answered on the second ring. "Captain Milham," he said, his voice tight, with something between fury and disbelief. "Tell me that video isn't what it looks like." "Depends what it looks like to you, sir." "It looks like a police officer put my best combat pilot on the ground for checking her phone, and then a room full of pilots saluted her while she was still in cuffs." "That's about right," Dixie said. Palmerson was quiet for a second. She could hear him breathing hard on the other end, the kind of controlled anger she remembered from briefings gone wrong. "Lucas Varon called me last night," he said. "He flew under me, too, years back. He said you were treated like garbage in that terminal, Dixie. Ignored ID, false report, the whole thing." "That's accurate. This is a Pentagon exposure problem now," Palmerson said, "whether that department realizes it or not. You don't put a decorated officer in cuffs on video and expect nobody upstairs to notice." Dixie sat up straighter. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing yet. But I want you talking to someone I trust. Her name is Lucy Sanders, DOT Civil Rights Division. She's been circling that exact airport department for months. I think your situation just handed her the case she's been waiting for." An hour later, Dixie sat in a small cafe near her hotel, laptop open, video call connecting. Agent Lucy Sanders appeared on screen, sharp-eyed, dressed plainly, a stack of folders visible on the desk behind her. "Captain Milham," Sanders said, "thank you for making time. Colonel Palmerson said you might already know more about this than I do." Sanders allowed a small, tired smile. "I've been building a file on that department for 6 months. Racial disparity and stops. Complaints that go nowhere. A pattern nobody upstairs wants to admit exists." She slid a folder toward the camera, flipping it open just enough for Dixie to see rows of case numbers. "Your arrest isn't an isolated incident. It's the same conduct, the same precinct, likely the same chain of command protecting the same officers." Dixie felt something cold settle in her chest. "So, this has happened before. To other people." "Repeatedly," Sanders said. "But none of them had 30 phones recording, and none of them had a room full of witnesses with the standing to make the department listen. You do. What do you need from me?" "A formal statement. Timeline. everything you remember, in order, no matter how small it seems. Sanders leaned closer to the screen. And I'll be honest with you, Captain, this isn't going to move fast. Departments protect their own. Chief Dashworth has been slow-walking my records requests for months. I need more than one bad afternoon on video. I need proof of what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. Dixie thought about Wellmore's voice through the holding room door. Handle this quietly before the chief sees it. There's something you should know, Dixie said. A sergeant said something on his radio while I was cuffed to a table. About keeping this quiet before it got to the chief. I don't think he knew anyone could hear him. Sanders's eyebrows lifted slightly. Did anyone record that? Dixie hesitated. She thought of Malik standing near the door, clipboard in hand, phone in his pocket. Maybe, she said. I need to ask someone. Find out, Sanders said. That kind of statement, if it exists, changes everything. It's the difference between one officer's bad judgment and a department actively covering for itself. After the call ended, Dixie sat with her coffee going cold in front of her, staring out the cafe window at travelers rolling suitcases past, oblivious to everything that had happened one terminal over. For the first time since the cuffs had clicked shut around her wrists, she didn't feel like a victim sitting helpless in a gray room. She felt like she had a mission again, and Dixie Millam had never once failed to finish a mission. 3 days after the arrest, Officer Marcus Reddington sat across a conference table from a department attorney named Grant Halliwell, a thin man with a calm voice and cold eyes. Sergeant Wellmore sat beside him, arms crossed, saying little. The video is a problem, Halliwell said, sliding a legal pad across the table. But videos don't tell us what you were thinking in the moment. Your report does. We need your report to explain the stop clearly. Give the public a reason. She was on her phone, looking around, Reddington said. That's suspicious behavior. That's all it takes. Halliwell shook his head slowly. That's not going to hold up against a salute video with 24 witnesses. We need something stronger. Something that shows this wasn't personal. Wasn't about her. Wellmore leaned forward. There was a security bulletin that morning. General profile stuff. Watch for irregular behavior near gates. We could tie the stop to that. Halliwell's expression didn't change, but something in his voice sharpened with interest. That works. Officer Reddington, you recall reviewing a bulletin before your shift that morning, correct? Behavior indicators consistent with what you observed? Reddington glanced at Wellmore, then back at Halliwell. He understood exactly what was being asked of him. Yeah, he said slowly. I remember something like that. Matched some of what I was seeing. Good, Halliwell said, already writing. We'll draft the report around that. Officer observed behavior consistent with a recent security bulletin. Standard protocol was followed. That's a defensible position. By that afternoon, the official incident report had been filed and quietly leaked to a friendly local reporter. The headline that ran that evening read, Officer followed security protocol, Department says. The article quoted the bulletin claim directly, framing Reddington's actions as careful and justified rather than careless and cruel. Dixie saw the article that night from her hotel room and felt her stomach twist. They're rewriting it, she muttered to herself. Rewriting the whole thing. Meanwhile, at the airport, Malik Coulson sat at his desk during a slow stretch of his shift, scrolling through the same article on his phone. Something about the timeline nagged at him. As a TSA supervisor, he had routine access to internal shift logs and bulletin distribution records, separate systems from the police department's own network. Out of habit, more than suspicion, he pulled up the security bulletin system and searched the date of the arrest. He found the bulletin Reddington claimed to have reviewed before his shift. The timestamp read 11:47 a.m. Dixie's arrest had happened at 9:12 a.m. Malik stared at the screen for a long moment, doing the math twice just to be sure he wasn't imagining it. The bulletin Reddington claimed justified his suspicion of Dixie hadn't even existed yet when he stopped her. It had been entered into the system nearly 3 hours after she was already in cuffs. He didn't say anything to anyone at first. He wasn't sure what to do with it. Reporting it inside the department felt pointless, maybe even dangerous. He'd already put himself out there once with the video. Instead, he took screenshots. Careful, time-stamped screenshots of the bulletin entry log, saved quietly to a folder on his personal cloud drive, separate from anything work-related. He didn't delete his original video either. He kept everything, untouched, waiting for the right moment. That evening, Dixie got a call from Agent Sanders. "I saw the article about the bulletin," Sanders said. "I want you to know, even if that bulletin is real, timing like that can be verified against dispatch and system logs eventually. These things leave trails. Departments think paperwork protects them, but paperwork can also convict them, if you know where to look." "How long will that take?" Dixie asked. "Longer than I'd like," Sanders admitted. "Departments don't hand over their own contradicting evidence quickly. I'll need proper legal process to force it, unless something faster turns up first." Dixie thought about Malik, about the way he'd kept his phone steady through the whole arrest, about the quiet way he'd stood near that holding room door. "There might be someone already looking," she said. "Talk to him," Sanders said, carefully. "If he's found something, we need to know exactly what, and we need it documented the right way, so it holds up later." Dixie ended the call and sat quietly, staring at the ceiling of her hotel room. The department thought a fake bulletin and a friendly headline would make the truth go away. They had no idea what kind of trail they were leaving behind. Lucas Varon couldn't stop thinking about the headline. "Officer followed security protocol," department says. He read it twice on his layover in Denver, jaw tight, hands gripping his phone like he wanted to crush it. He wasn't going to let the department control the story that easily. That night, from a hotel room 3 states away, he started making calls. Old squadron contacts, airline crew he'd flown with for years, a veterans group he volunteered with back home. He didn't ask for money or lawyers. He asked for one simple thing: show up. "Same terminal," he told each person. "Same gate, if we can manage it. We're not protesting. We're just standing there, letting people see who she really is." Word spread fast. Pilots talked to pilots. Veterans talked to veterans. Within 4 days, Varon had over 60 people confirmed, some flying in on their own dime just to be there. Dixie found out about it through a text from Varon that simply read, "Be at gate C14, Thursday, 10 a.m. Wear whatever you want. Just be there." She almost said no. Some part of her wanted to disappear from cameras entirely, to let her lawyer and Sanders handle things quietly through proper channels. But another part of her, the part that had spent years refusing to back down from anything, knew quiet wasn't working. Quiet had gotten her a false bulletin and a friendly headline defending the man who kicked her ID across the floor. She showed up. When she walked into the terminal Thursday morning, she stopped cold at the site waiting for her. Dozens of pilots in full uniform stood in neat rows near the gate, several airline captains among them, along with veterans in old service jackets, medals pinned proudly to their chests. Malik stood near the back with his phone raised again, though this time 3 local news cameras stood beside him, filming the same scene. Varon stepped forward first, saluting her the way he had that first terrible day. Except this time, there were no cuffs on her wrists, no officer pulling her arm. "Captain Millam," he said, loud enough for the cameras to catch clearly. "Welcome back to Gate C14. One by one, the others saluted too, a wall of respect stretching across the same tile floor where she'd been forced to her knees just over a week earlier. Reporters pushed forward, microphones extended, "Captain Milham, can you tell us what happened that day?" one reporter asked. Dixie took a steady breath. "I checked my phone while waiting on a friend's flight. That's what happened. That's the entire crime I committed. The department says an officer followed a security bulletin," another reporter said. "Do you have a response to that?" "I'd ask them to show the timestamp on that bulletin," Dixie said evenly, "because from what I understand, it didn't exist yet when I was already in handcuffs." A ripple went through the small crowd of reporters. Pens moved fast across notepads. Malik, standing at the back, felt his stomach flip. He hadn't told anyone officially about the timestamp discrepancy yet, only shared quiet hints with Dixie. Watching her say it out loud in front of cameras made it suddenly, terrifyingly real. That evening, back at his apartment, Malik made a decision. He reached out to a local reporter he trusted, someone who had covered TSA staffing issues fairly in the past, and offered to share information anonymously. He didn't reveal his name or his role. He simply sent the time-stamped screenshots showing the bulletin's real entry time, 3 hours after Dixie's arrest. The reporter verified the file metadata overnight. By morning, the story had changed completely. Department's Security Bulletin Defense. Contradicted by system records, the new headline read. The article laid out the timeline plainly. Arrest at 9:12 a.m., bulletin entered at 11:47 a.m., no spin. No department quote softening it. Just the numbers, side by side. Impossible to explain away. Dixie read it on her phone that morning with her coffee shaking slightly in her other hand. Chief Dashworth's office scrambled within hours. By early afternoon, a terse statement went out. We are aware of discrepancies raised regarding the timeline of events and are reviewing the matter internally. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission. But it was a crack. The first real crack Dixie had seen since the moment those cuffs snapped around her wrists. She thought of the terminal full of saluting strangers behind her, of Varen's steady voice on camera, of Malik quietly working in the background without ever needing credit. For the first time, she let herself believe the department was starting to lose control of its own story. 1 week after the timestamp story broke, Dixie's phone rang while she was packing her bag at the hotel, finally preparing to head home. It was Agent Sanders, and for the first time since they'd started talking, her voice carried something close to excitement. The Department of Transportation is opening a formal review, Sanders said, of the whole department, not just your arrest, the pattern behind it. Your case, combined with the bulletin discrepancy, gave us enough public pressure to finally push it through. Dixie sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. They're actually doing something. They're doing something, Sanders confirmed. Announcement goes out this afternoon. I wanted you to hear it from me first. By early evening, the news had already spread. Chief Perry Dashworth stood at a podium again, but this time her tone had shifted from defensive to carefully cooperative. Cameras flashed as she read from a prepared statement. In light of recent developments, our department will fully cooperate with the Department of Transportation's review, Dashworth said. We take these concerns seriously. Effective immediately, Officer Reddington has been placed on administrative desk duty pending the outcome of an independent internal review. Dixie watched the broadcast with cautious relief. It wasn't justice yet, but it was movement, real movement, after weeks of stone walls. Varen called her that night, his voice lighter than she'd heard it in weeks. Desk duty, he said. It's not enough, but it's something. First time that department's admitted anything since this started. Sanders says the Federal Review will look at everything, Dixie told him. Not just me, other cases too. The pattern she's been building for months. You did that, Varen said. You and that TSA kid with the timestamps. We did it, Dixie corrected. All of us. 2 days later, Colonel Palmerson called with news of his own. I've made some calls, he said. Pentagon awareness of your case is spreading. People are paying attention to how this plays out, especially with a decorated officer at the center of it. That kind of attention makes it harder for a local department to bury things quietly, even if they want to. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Palmerson said. Departments like this don't fold easily. They fold slowly, and only when they have no other choice left. Dixie met with Sanders in person a few days later, in a small government office cluttered with case files and a whiteboard covered in dates and names. Sanders looked exhausted but focused, gesturing Dixie toward a chair across from her desk. I'm scheduling a formal federal hearing, Sanders said. 6 weeks from now. Enough time to gather everything properly. Make sure it's airtight when we present it. Your testimony, the bulletin evidence, witness statements from the terminal, everything. 6 weeks, Dixie repeated. I know that feels long, Sanders said. But rushed cases fall apart under pressure. I want this one to hold. Dixie nodded slowly, though impatience gnawed at her chest. She'd spent her career trained to act fast, to make split-second decisions under fire. Waiting 6 weeks for a hearing felt like being grounded, stuck circling an airfield with no clearance to land. What do you need from me in the meantime? She asked. Stay visible, but careful, Sanders said. Keep your statement consistent. Don't give the department's lawyers anything to twist. And Dixie, talk to that TSA supervisor again, Malik. If he's willing to formally testify on the record, that changes the weight of everything he's found so far. That evening, Dixie allowed herself something she hadn't felt in weeks. Real hope. She sat by her hotel window, watching planes rise and fall against the darkening sky, and thought about how far things had come since that first terrible morning at Gate C-14. A viral video. A room full of saluting strangers. A falsified bulletin exposed by a quiet TSA supervisor nobody had noticed. A federal investigator who'd been fighting this exact fight long before Dixie ever landed in that terminal. Reddington was on desk duty. Wellmore hadn't shown his face publicly since the story broke. Dashworth was cooperating, at least on paper. For the first time, Dixie let herself believe accountability might actually be within reach. She didn't know yet how wrong that hope would turn out to be, or how quickly the department would try to close ranks again once the cameras stopped watching quite so closely. But for one quiet evening, staring out at a sky full of planes she couldn't fly herself, Dixie Milham allowed herself to breathe. 2 weeks before the scheduled federal hearing, Dixie sat in her home office, going over her written statement for what felt like the 100th time, when Sanders called with news that made her stomach drop. The internal review Dashworth promised, Sanders said. I finally got confirmation on who's running it. Who? Sergeant Wellmore's division. Dixie closed her eyes. The same sergeant who told Reddington to keep this quiet. The same one, Sanders confirmed. It's not illegal, technically. Departments are allowed to review themselves before external oversight steps in, but it means whatever conclusion comes out of that review was written before anyone opened the file. It's designed to clear Reddington quietly, on paper, before our hearing even starts. Can you stop it? Not directly, but I can make sure the federal hearing doesn't rely on anything they produce. We use our own evidence, untouched by them. Dixie hung up, feeling the ground shift slightly under her. The desk duty, the cooperative statement, all of it had felt like real progress. Now it looked more like a performance, staged just long enough to buy the department time to protect its own. 3 days later, the second blow landed. A local news station aired a short clip during their evening broadcast, credited to newly released airport security footage. The video showed a grainy angle of Dixie standing at the gate, arms slightly raised, her posture caught mid-motion in a way that looked, out of context, aggressive. The clip cut off just before Reddington approached her, and it cut off again just after, leaving out everything that came before and after the frozen, misleading moment. The anchor's voiceover was careful, almost gentle, but devastating all the same. New footage raises questions about the full context of the widely shared airport arrest video, with some now asking whether the officer's response may have been more justified than initially believed. Dixie watched it twice, her hands cold. She recognized her own body in the frame, remembered exactly what she'd been doing in that split second, gesturing toward her boarding pass. Nothing more. But stripped of context, timed and cut the way it was, it looked like something else entirely. Her phone exploded with messages within the hour. Some supportive, some suddenly uncertain. A few outright hostile, strangers online suddenly questioning whether she'd been the whole story all along. She called Sanders immediately. "They edited it," Dixie said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Cut it right before he approached me. Made it look like I was the aggressive one." "I saw it," Sanders said grimly. "Selective editing, timed 2 weeks before our hearing. That's not an accident. That's strategy. Can we get the full footage, the real footage, unedited?" "I've been trying," Sanders said. "Which brings me to the next problem. I filed a formal request for the complete CCTV archive from that gate, full, unedited, time-stamped. I need it to counter this clip directly." "And?" There was a pause on the line. "Denied. This afternoon. Dashworth's office cited ongoing investigation as grounds to withhold it." Dixie sat down hard on her couch, staring blankly at the muted television still looping the damaging clip in a corner of the screen. "They're allowed to just deny it?" she asked. "The same footage that could clear my name?" "Temporarily, yes," Sanders said. "I can push back through legal channels, but that takes time we don't fully have before the hearing. And if the edited clip keeps circulating unanswered, it could shift how the hearing panel sees you before we even walk in the room." Dixie pressed her palm against her forehead, exhaustion crashing over her all at once. Weeks of careful progress, the salute video, the exposed bulletin, the Federal Review announcement, all of it suddenly felt fragile again, like sand shifting under her feet. "They're not going to make this easy," she said quietly. "No," Sanders agreed. "They never do. Departments protect themselves first. Always. It's not until they have absolutely no other option left that they start protecting the truth instead." After the call ended, Dixie sat alone in the dark, replaying the edited clip in her mind, feeling the ground beneath her case crack wider with every passing hour. Somewhere, buried in a system the department controlled and refused to release, sat footage that could prove exactly what really happened. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Dixie didn't know how she was going to get to it in time. The denial letter sat on Dixie's kitchen table for 2 days before she could bring herself to read it a third time. Official letterhead. Clean, bureaucratic language. Access to requested surveillance footage denied at this time due to ongoing internal investigation. No timeline given for reconsideration. She traced her finger along the last line, feeling something close to despair settle into her chest. The hearing was 10 days away. The edited clip was still circulating online, still doing its quiet damage every time someone new stumbled across it without the context she couldn't yet prove. Sanders called that afternoon, her voice tighter than usual. "I want to be straight with you," she said. "Without that footage, or something equally strong to counter the edited clip, this hearing gets harder. Not impossible. Harder. Dashworth's team has closed ranks completely. Wellmore's sham review will probably clear Reddington on paper any day now. They're playing for time, and right now, time is working against us. There has to be something," Dixie said, more to herself than to Sanders. "If there is, we need it fast." After the call, Dixie sat at her table for a long time, staring at nothing, running back through every moment of that terrible morning at gate C14. The cuffs, the scattered bag, the ID kicked aside, the holding room, Wellmore's voice through the door, and Malik. Malik with his phone raised the entire time, from the first moment officers surrounded her to the second they disappeared around the corner toward the holding room. Malik standing quietly outside that door with a clipboard, pretending to check inventory while his phone recorded everything Wellmore said. Dixie sat up straight. The department controlled a lot of things. Dashworth's office controlled the CCTV archive, the internal reports, the sham review, even parts of the press narrative for a while. But Malik wasn't airport police. He was TSA, federal technically, but operating under an entirely separate chain of authority, separate systems, separate records that Dashworth's department had no power to touch, edit, or deny. They had never once taken his phone, never once asked him for his footage. In all the chaos, all the strategy, all the lawyers and sergeants scrambling to protect themselves, nobody on the department side had thought to control the one witness standing quietly at the edges the entire time. Dixie grabbed her phone and called Malik directly for the first time since the terminal event weeks earlier. He answered on the second ring, sounding surprised. "Captain Milham. Everything okay?" "I need to ask you something important," Dixie said. "That day, everything you filmed, from the moment they stopped me until the moment I was walked out of that holding area. Do you still have it? All of it? Untouched?" There was a brief pause on the line. "Yeah," Malik said slowly. "I never deleted anything. I backed it up the same night, actually, onto a separate drive, just in case. I wasn't sure what to do with all of it, so I just kept it, along with the bulletin screenshots." "All of it," Dixie repeated, her pulse quickening. "Including the audio outside the holding room door?" "Especially that," Malik said. "I remember thinking that part mattered most, even before I understood exactly why." Dixie closed her eyes, relief and adrenaline crashing through her chest at the same time. "Malik, I need you to talk to someone. Agent Sanders, the federal investigator I mentioned before. She needs everything you have, exactly as it is, unedited, time-stamped, all of it." "Is this going to cause problems for me?" Malik asked, his voice quieter now, uncertain. "It might," Dixie said honestly. "I won't lie to you about that. But it's the difference between the truth coming out or getting buried for good. Dashworth's office just denied a federal request for footage that could clear my name. You might be the only person left holding evidence they can't touch or edit." Another pause, longer this time. Then Malik exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. "Give me her number. I kept it this long for a reason. I guess I always knew it might matter eventually." Dixie felt something shift inside her chest for the first time in days. A small, sharp flicker of hope rising through the exhaustion. The department had spent weeks building walls, editing footage, denying requests, protecting their own at every turn. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd only ever tried to silence one set of eyes in that terminal. They had completely forgotten about the other. 3 days later, Dixie sat in a small conference room at the federal building alongside Agent Sanders and Colonel Palmerson, who had flown in personally once he heard what Malik had found. Across the table, Malik Colson set his laptop down carefully, like it held something fragile. "I backed up everything the night of the arrest," Malik said, connecting the laptop to a larger screen mounted on the wall. "Video, audio, the bulletin screenshots. Nothing's been touched since." Sanders leaned forward. "Play it from the beginning. Full timeline." The screen lit up with the video Malik had captured that morning. Unedited, uncut, time-stamped in the corner. It began before Reddington ever approached Dixie, showing her simply sitting at the gate, checking her phone, glancing around like anyone waiting for a delayed connection. Then Reddington's approach, The demand for ID. Dixie's calm compliance. The moment she was forced to the ground. Her ID and pilot's license spilling from her bag. Clearly visible. Clearly real. Then came the part Dixie had been waiting weeks to hear again. Wellmore's voice, slightly muffled but unmistakable, came through the recording from outside the holding room door. "We need to handle this quietly, before the chief sees it blow up any further. Get Reddington's report finished. Standard processing. No comment to press." Palmerson's jaw tightened as he listened. "That's a department actively covering for itself," he said. "Not an officer making a bad call in the moment. That's leadership choosing silence over accountability." "There's more," Malek said quietly, pulling up a second file. The bulletin logs. He displayed the timestamp screenshots side by side. Dixie's arrest, logged officially at 9:12 a.m. The security bulletin Reddington claimed justified his suspicion. Entered into the system at 11:47 a.m., nearly 3 hours later. This proves the department's official incident report contains a fabricated justification, Sanders said, writing quickly on her legal pad. Filed after the fact, presented as if it existed beforehand. That's not just misconduct. Depending on how it's charged, that's falsification of an official record. Dixie sat quietly through all of it, watching herself relive that morning on a screen in front of strangers, feeling the same tight anger rise in her chest all over again. But underneath the anger, something steadier was building now. Something that felt almost like relief. "This is everything we need," Sanders said finally, closing her folder. Untouched, independently sourced, completely outside the department's control. They can't edit this. They can't deny access to it, because it was never theirs to control in the first place. "What happens now?" Dixie asked. "I subpoena all of it into the federal hearing record," Sanders said. "Formally, immediately. Once it's entered as evidence, no internal review, no denied FOIA request, no selectively edited CCTV clip can undo what's on this recording." Palmerson nodded slowly, already reaching for his own phone. "I'll make some calls tonight," he said. "This deserves national attention, not just local coverage. If the Pentagon's aware, if defense press is watching, that department loses its ability to quietly bury this, the way they've tried to do at every other turn." "You think that'll work?" Dixie asked. "I think," Palmerson said, "that a department used to controlling a local news cycle has no idea what happens when a story like this reaches a national one. They've been playing a small game this whole time. We're about to change the size of the board." Malik sat back slightly, looking almost stunned by the weight of what he'd just handed over. "I never thought a video from my phone would end up mattering this much," he admitted. "It's the only reason any of this is possible," Dixie told him. "You kept recording when everyone else looked away. That's not small." Sanders gathered her files, already moving toward the door. Energy radiating off her that hadn't been there in weeks. "The hearing is in 4 days," she said. "I'll have all of this formally entered by tomorrow morning. Captain Milham, Colonel Palmerson, Mr. Coulson, I need everyone ready to speak on record." As the meeting broke up, Dixie lingered by the window for a moment, watching the sun sink low over the city skyline. Weeks of stone walls, sham reviews, and edited footage had nearly convinced her the truth might never surface at all. But it had been there the whole time, sitting quietly on a backup drive, waiting for someone brave enough to hand it over. The department had spent all their effort protecting the evidence they controlled. They'd never imagined the evidence that would sink them was sitting untouched in a TSA supervisor's jacket pocket the entire time. The federal hearing room filled early, chairs scraping against the floor as reporters set up cameras along the back wall. Colonel Palmerson's outreach had worked exactly as he'd promised. National Defense Press sat beside local reporters this time, and no department statement, however carefully worded, was going to control a room this size. Dixie sat at a long table beside Sanders, her uniform pressed, her hands steady on top of her folder. Behind her, filling 3 full rows of the gallery, sat Lucas Varon, and nearly 40 pilots and veterans who had traveled in for the hearing, the same people who had once stood saluting her in a terminal, now sitting quietly, ready to speak if called. Across the room, Chief Perry Dashworth sat beside department counsel, her posture stiff, her expression carefully arranged into something neutral. Officer Reddington and Sergeant Wellmore sat further back, both avoiding eye contact with the gallery entirely. The hearing panel chair called the session to order. Sanders stood first, walking the panel through the timeline with practiced precision. She played Malik's unedited footage in full, the same recording from the beginning, showing Dixie calmly seated, then cuffed, then her ID kicked aside on the tile floor. A murmur rippled through the gallery when the audio caught Wellmore's voice through the holding room door. "We need to handle this quietly, before the chief sees it." Wellmore's face went pale in his seat. He stared down at the table in front of him, refusing to look up. Sanders followed with the bulletin timestamps, laid out clearly on a projected screen. Arrest logged at 9:12 a.m. Bulletin entered at 11:47 a.m. She didn't need to explain the implication. The panel members exchanged glances, several taking notes rapidly. "This is not a case of an officer's split-second misjudgment," Sanders told the panel. "This is a documented pattern, an official report built on a fabricated timeline, and a supervising sergeant caught on tape actively directing a cover-up before departmental leadership could even be informed. When it was Dixie's turn to testify, she spoke plainly, without embellishment, describing exactly what happened, exactly what she felt, exactly what she'd said to Reddington in that moment when he refused to check her ID a second time. "I told him it was real," she said. "I told him to run it. He chose not to, twice. Not because he lacked the ability, because he'd already decided who I was before I ever opened my mouth." Captain Varon testified next, describing the moment he recognized her, the moment he saluted, the wave of pilots and veterans who followed without hesitation. "She served this country with distinction," he told the panel. "And she was treated like a criminal for checking her phone." Then came the moment Dixie had been waiting weeks for. The panel chair turned toward Chief Dashworth. "Chief Dashworth, can you explain why a request for the complete unedited CCTV archive from that gate was denied, citing an ongoing investigation, while a selectively edited clip from that same footage was leaked to press during that same period?" Dashworth's mouth opened, then closed. "I was not personally involved in the release of that clip," she said carefully. "But you were aware it happened," the panel chair pressed. A long pause. "Yes. And the internal review you announced publicly, promising independence, was conducted by Sergeant Wellmore's own division. The same sergeant recorded directing officers to keep this matter quiet before it reached your desk." Dashworth's composure cracked slightly, her hands tightening around the edge of the table. "That review was standard procedure," she said, though her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Standard procedure," the panel chair repeated flatly, glancing down at her earlier public statement, read back word for word. "We believe the stop was procedurally sound. Chief Dashworth, does that statement still reflect your position, given everything presented today?" Dashworth said nothing for a long moment. The silence stretched through the room, heavier than any answer could have been. "No," she finally said quietly. "It does not." A ripple moved through the gallery. Not celebration exactly, but something close to it. Dixie felt her chest loosen slightly for the first time in weeks, watching the woman who had defended Reddington's actions on national television finally unable to defend them at all. The panel chair closed her folder. "This panel formally acknowledges the falsified incident report and the documented efforts to suppress evidence as clear indicators of misconduct extending beyond a single officer's actions. Reddington sat frozen in his seat. Wellmore stared at the floor, his career already crumbling in real time in front of a room full of cameras. Dixie glanced back once at Varen, at Malik seated quietly near the back, at Palmerson watching with sharp, satisfied eyes. The truth was, finally, fully on record, and there was no way left for anyone to bury it. The news moved fast once the hearing ended. By that evening, national outlets had picked up the story in full, running clips of Wellmore's recorded voice alongside the bulletin timeline graphics Sanders had presented. What had once been a local controversy defended by careful department statements was now a national story nobody in power could quietly wave away. 2 days after the hearing, the Airport Police Department issued a statement Dixie had waited weeks to read. Officer Marcus Reddington had been formally terminated, effective immediately, with the statement noting that his conduct, including a falsified incident report, would be referred to the district attorney's office for review of possible criminal charges related to filing a false official document. Dixie read the statement twice at her kitchen table, feeling something unclench slowly in her chest that had been tight since the moment those cuffs first closed around her wrists. Falsifying an official report isn't something they can spin their way out of, Sanders told her over the phone that afternoon. That's not discretion. That's a crime. He kicked your ID aside, then lied about why he stopped you in the first place. The evidence leaves no room to argue otherwise. Sergeant Wellmore's fall came just as fast. Within the week, department leadership announced he had been stripped of his rank and forced to resign, his own recorded voice, caught through a thin holding room door, becoming the exact piece of evidence that ended his career. Local reporters noted that Wellmore had declined to comment, refusing to speak to any outlet that reached out. He thought nobody was listening, Malik said when Dixie called to tell him the news. The whole time, he thought he was untouchable, because nobody would ever hear what he actually said. Someone was always listening, Dixie told him. You made sure of that. The bigger blow landed a week later. Chief Perry Dashworth, facing mounting pressure from the Department of Transportation and a wave of national scrutiny she could no longer manage with careful statements alone, announced her resignation during a brief, subdued press conference. She read a short prepared statement, thanking the department for the opportunity to serve, offering no apology, no direct acknowledgement of what her leadership had allowed to happen. Dixie watched the broadcast with Varen over video call, both of them quiet for a moment after Dashworth stepped away from the podium for the final time. No apology, Varen said, even now. Doesn't matter, Dixie said. She's gone. The department's not hers to protect anymore. That same week, the Department of Transportation confirmed the Airport Police Department would be placed under a federal consent decree, requiring independent oversight of stop patterns, use of force incidents, and internal reporting procedures for the next several years. Agent Sanders, who had spent 6 months building a case nobody in power wanted to hear before Dixie's arrest ever happened, finally had the systemic accountability she'd been fighting for. This is bigger than just your case now, Sanders told Dixie during their final call that week. This affects every stop that department makes going forward. Every person who might have ended up exactly where you were, without 30 phones recording, without pilots willing to stand up in a crowded terminal. How many people do you think never got that chance? Dixie asked quietly. Too many, Sanders admitted. That's why this matters. Not just for you. For everyone after you. Dixie sat with that for a long moment after the call ended, thinking about all the names she'd seen briefly on Sanders's case file weeks earlier. Rows of complaints that had gone nowhere, buried in a system built to protect itself instead of the people it was supposed to serve. Reddington was gone. Wellmore was gone. Dashworth was gone. A department that had once closed ranks completely now stood publicly, undeniably accountable. Its every future action bound by federal oversight it could no longer avoid or delay. It wasn't the kind of ending that erased what had happened. Dixie still felt the memory of cold tile against her cheek sometimes, still felt her shoulder ache on cold mornings, where the old injury from being yanked upright too roughly still lingered. But watching the resignation, the consent decree announcement, the criminal referral, one after another, Dixie finally felt something she hadn't let herself feel in weeks. It was over. Not forgotten, not erased, but over and undeniably, visibly won. 6 weeks after the hearing, Dixie stood at the entrance to Terminal C again, suitcase handle in hand, heart beating a little faster than she wanted to admit. She hadn't been back to this airport since the day everything happened. She'd flown out of other terminals since then, taken longer drives to avoid it entirely. But this trip, a visit to see Colonel Palmerson's retirement ceremony, meant coming back through Gate C-14, whether she liked it or not. She walked through the security checkpoint slowly, half expecting the same tension to rise in her chest, the same tightness in her shoulders. Instead, she felt something steadier, calmer. Nobody stopped her. Nobody questioned her. She moved through security like anyone else, boarding pass in hand, coffee in the other, just another traveler making her way toward a gate. As she rounded the corner toward Gate C-14, she stopped walking entirely. A small plaque had been mounted near the gate entrance, brushed metal, simple lettering. She stepped closer to read it. In recognition of Captain Dixie Milham and the community of service members who stood in solidarity here. May this terminal always remember the difference between suspicion and truth. Beneath the main text, smaller letters credited the Veterans Association Varen had rallied that day, along with a note thanking airport staff who supported transparency and accountability during the events that followed. Dixie stood in front of it for a long moment, throat tight, remembering exactly where she'd knelt on that same stretch of tile floor, remembering the cold metal of the cuffs, the sound of her ID sliding across the ground. Ignored. Now there was a plaque instead, a permanent marker that said none of it had been forgotten, or excused, or quietly buried the way the department had once tried so hard to manage. They installed that last month, a familiar voice said behind her. Dixie turned to find Lucas Varen standing there in his captain's uniform, a small duffel bag slung over one shoulder, clearly between flights himself. He smiled, the same steady smile she remembered from the day he'd first stepped out of a boarding line and snapped to attention in front of a terminal full of strangers. "You didn't tell me," Dixie said, still a little stunned. "Wanted you to see it for yourself," Varen said. "Figured it would mean more that way." They stood together for a moment, looking at the plaque, then out at the gate beyond it, filled now with ordinary travelers checking phones, sipping coffee, waiting for ordinary flights, none of them aware of what this exact stretch of floor had once meant. "How's Malik?" Dixie asked. "Good, actually," Varen said. "Got a promotion, believe it or not. TSA leadership noticed how he handled everything. Quietly, carefully, the right way." Dixie smiled, genuinely, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "He deserves that." "And Wellmore's case?" Varen asked. "Any updates?" "Formal charges filed last week," Dixie said. "Falsifying an official report. Reddington's case moves forward, too. Sanders says both should go to trial by early next year." "Good," Varen said simply. No satisfaction in his voice, just quiet resolve. Justice. Finally moving the way it should have from the start. The boarding announcement crackled overhead, calling Dixie's flight to the gate. She glanced at her watch, then back at Varen. "That's me," she said. Varen straightened slightly, the same way he had that first terrible day, and for a moment Dixie thought he might salute her again, right there in front of the plaque, in front of the gate that had once held her down. Instead, He simply extended his hand. She shook it. "Safe flight, Captain," he said. "You too, Captain," she answered. Dixie turned and walked toward the jet bridge, boarding pass scanning cleanly. No officer stepping into her path, no hand gripping her arm, no voice ordering her to the ground. Just an open walkway, and beyond it, a plane waiting to take her home. She glanced back once before stepping through the door, taking in the plaque one final time. The quiet gate, the ordinary hum of travelers moving freely around her. Then she stepped onto the jet bridge and let the door close gently behind her. The terminal that once tried to break her had finally, fully, let her go. And this time, she walked through it exactly the way she deserved to, the whole time. Free, unbothered, vindicated. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.